Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Sales Enablement Strategies for Long-Term Success, sponsored by Adobe, CGS Immersive, Force Management, InfoPro Learning, and Integrity Solutions. I'm Emma, Marketing Associate here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat window to interact with our speakers with any comments. And if you have any questions, please submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon in your Zoom toolbar below. We'll address all the comments and questions throughout the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey will pop open in your browser. We'd really appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And as always, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through our articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our podcast, and more. We'd also love to hear what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms for us to continue the conversation. And now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, Brian Walsh and Rachel Clapp-Miller. Brian has led seller manager training sessions with hundreds of attendees at a time, as well as leadership workshops and SKO events for organizations of all sizes, from small startups to companies valued over $6 billion and with multinational go-to-market teams numbering in the thousands. Rachel Clapp-Miller leads Force Management's marketing and demand gen efforts. She's the producer of the Revenue Builders podcast, as well as the host of Force Management's Audible Ready Sales podcast. She brings an extensive television and media background to her marketing role. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for having us. I'm getting the slides going right now. We are excited to be here. Force Management is a B2B consulting firm that helps organizations improve sales performance, and we help enablement teams drive faster results. We help them make their jobs easier. I am thrilled to be here for this conversation today. I know there's been a lot of great sessions, and thank you for making the time to join ours. I'm also excited to have this conversation with my colleague, Brian Walsh. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Rachel. Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Yeah, so Brian works with companies around the world. He spends a lot of time on the road. I know he's just coming back from a little tour of meeting clients, but now he's back home in Ohio, and he works specifically with leadership and enablement teams, revenue teams, helping them improve sales performance by launching programs that are measured, reinforce, and really move the revenue needle. I've seen him do it time and time again, so I'm excited for him to share some of his expertise here today. And we titled this session, How to Align Training with Market Shifts and Company Objectives. I know for a lot of your sales teams right now, it's a tough environment, as it always is when the economy is fluctuating. But in some ways, the market is always shifting, and we need to manage these ebbs and flows that come and go. So we're going to start by talking about what we're hearing from sales enablement professionals as it relates to their initiatives this year. I'm going to throw up some of the research from Training Industry, but Brian, I'd love to hear what you're hearing from the teams you work with.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this, and I have a lot of notes, so you might see my eyes go down here and there. But I hear a lot of the same things from enablement and L&D and delivery folks that I hear from marketing and product people and leaders that we talk with. And they kind of go down 2 or 3 themes, like, how do I align our sales? How do I align what I'm doing to our sales objectives? More importantly, how do I get credit for that? How do I attribute what we're doing to success? And how do I get more credibility in the organization for what we do every day? That's a big thing I hear a lot.
Because I mean, we all know being in charge of training and enablement is not easy. That is a difficult job. And the training industry research showed us some key challenges I know a lot of you are probably facing. First is identifying, evaluating training needs, driving consistency across departments, particularly when you have that large staff or those global teams and you're trying to equip them, and making sure you're getting the ROI from the training initiatives. And kind of the underlying theme under all of this is really how you're equipping it all with AI, right? How is AI a factor in
Yeah.
your training initiatives?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the one thing that can help you with all this is really aligning it with the companies you're training, with the current state, right? Those company priorities.
Yeah, I think specifically, and it's a phrase that we like a lot. Some of you who might know us might have heard this before, but I think a lot of what we're posing here goes back to one thing, and it's the thing that matters in the marketplace too, when whoever we're training is out in front of our customers, in whatever role they're in. But it's this idea of attaching, and I know I mentioned it before, to the company objectives, but specifically to the revenue objectives. And we do have this phrase, this revenue mindset phrase that I know we're going to jump to, but that's really in my mind what this is about. I think it's a key component for someone who's in a role like this to be constantly thinking about.
Yeah, and it's aligning that organization with that right mindset. So if we take a step back from training enablement, let's think of that end game with an organization. And when it comes to sales specifically for go-to-market, you need to equip them with a revenue mindset. So walk us through what that means, Brian.
Well, first of all, let's just agree that when we say enable the revenue mindset for sales, we literally mean anyone who's customer facing or touching the customer in any form or fashion, whether it's marketing, product, the sales rep, the people who come in before to do lead gen or after, et cetera, et cetera. But it's shifting the traditional mindset of let's make sure that someone's enabled in what we do and able to execute on who we are and what we do, and adding that ability to also attach to what the customer is trying to achieve, which is like 90% of the time revenue. But that means for us as enablement folks, what we deliver has got to enable the revenue for our company. And what's interesting about that is if I've got that mindset in terms of how I'm thinking about what I'm delivering to the organization, I'm actually just naturally going to attach that mindset to our folks in terms of how they're speaking to the marketplace. So it's kind of a 1+1 = 3 kind of thing. And I'm not sure I'm fully explaining it yet, but hopefully as we go down this road together, I think we will. My whole point is that if I can equip our entire team that's customer facing or customer enabling, either way you want to think about it, with this mindset of attached to revenue, attached to the business objectives, I'm not only changing how what I'm doing internally as an enablement person gets viewed, I'm also creating that mindset in terms of every conversation we have in front of our customer base.
Right. And when we think about those training needs, it's getting the learning is important, right? But it's getting beyond that and aligning it to the end game. What do you want these teams to do in the field? What does good look like for them? What are the metrics you're trying to drive beyond course completions, manager sessions, coaching? What do you want to see from things like quota attainment, ramp time, and different productivity metrics?
Yeah, and I think I know we're going to dive into this in a minute as we go forward, but this idea that everything as I was thinking about today, I was reminded of somebody I worked for a long time ago named Nancy Nagel, and Nancy used to say this all the time: everything we do should create positive and profitable revenue. And it was a really interesting way for her to think about it. Positive revenue sometimes was $1 today versus $100 tomorrow, or vice versa, but it was positive and profitable. And I think that's the mindset I'm trying to get my people to think about in everything I enable with them. In fact, maybe we can transition to what this looks like across the go-to-market team and look at what's happening across the sales process. Because
Yeah.
if we think about why this matters, there's this idea that this is a vision of or an example of a view of all of the different people who are going to touch a customer over the lifetime of an engagement. And there's this value chain of different people who are constantly drafting in and out of the customer conversation. And those little dots that are numbered all represent handshakes that should be happening, not handoffs. Handshakes, minor term, but everybody knows what happens when you hand something off. It drops a lot of times, and it's damaged. If we handshake every step of the way in the customer engagement, think about what's happening. We're allowing people to draft in more fluently, get in front of the customer more fluently, and maybe make us more not only effective but efficient, shortening things like sales cycles, which means if I'm going to have this mindset of enabling a revenue mindset externally, but also for myself in terms of how I think about what we're creating and delivering to our teams, it means that I can't focus that in on just one audience, right? I have to make sure that I'm focusing in this across the whole organization so that whatever we're trying to get people to do more effectively, I'm enabling them to execute those processes in a great way consistently, not just on a one-time basis.
Yeah, exactly, Brian. And before we keep going with this, I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions on what we're talking about, or if you have comments, please throw them in the question pane, throw in the chat pane. We'll be watching that and would love to hear from you of what you think and how this is showing up in your own organizations. But Brian, to your point, as we think about this process and the whole organization, at the foundational level, if I'm setting up my training programs for the year, for the back half of the year, the ones that are going on now, thinking through 26, I'm ensuring those handshakes are the best that they can be. And I'm thinking about this process, right? The end game, whatever it looks like in my organization.
Well, yeah, because when it breaks, thank you, some really bad things happen. And I think we better think about what that is. When we are training in silos and not thinking about that larger picture that looked really nice before it broke, right? When it breaks, our customers are still going through their processes. And when we don't do this effectively, and our training programs are not aligned to create the type of alignment that you saw a minute ago, a lot of interesting things happen. You lose business opportunities, you lose revenue because deals get smaller, they take longer. And maybe more importantly for a lot of the folks on this call, you lose credibility. In fact, nobody's going to want to hear this, but it's real easy for our training programs to become the scapegoat. You might be the thing that gets blamed, if that makes sense.
Right, because you could have the best training program, all the bells and whistles, great learning objectives,
Yeah.
great curriculum.
Yep.
And your people aren't going to be able to execute on that because this process is broken.
Or the training itself isn't thought through to pull all of these pieces together.
Correct. That's a great point, right?
And
It's not
I'll be
aligned.
the first to admit, a lot of times that's because of what's coming at us from the top down. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. So when we're going to hit this next section, and we want to make sure because of all those things you just said, that our training initiatives, our enablement initiatives are aligned to those corporate priorities. And we want to make sure they're enabling this revenue mindset. So when we go through this next section, for those of you watching, consider the training programs that you have planned for this year, next, or maybe the ones that are going on right now. And there's some things we want people to think about today, Brian.
Yeah, there's, me, I like the rule of three. So we got three big questions that we're hoping everybody will start to think through, and we'll talk about each one. But these are questions that I think you can be asking yourselves right now, but on a daily or at least consistent basis, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever the right pattern might be for you, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, here's the first one. What are the organizational goals and objectives we're enabling, and what success metrics will support them?
Okay, this is important. I think when we talk success metrics here, we should just define and make sure everybody's clear about what we mean. We don't mean outcomes. Outcomes are important. Outcomes are what I like to call finish line measurements. They're critically important, like revenue lift, like X number of our people making the number, et cetera. But I need metrics that are leading indicators. I think about driving from New York City to Los Angeles and knowing that you're supposed to hit, I don't know, Omaha, Nebraska within 20 hours and finding yourself in Charlotte, North Carolina maybe that's a little too late, but at least you can course correct. You get my point, right? I mean, there's these mile markers along the way. In fact, you got to make sure that you've got these measurements in place to ensure that you're actually on track to get there, but more importantly, that you can course correct accordingly early and often. And here's an example that came up last week. I was with a newer client, and they were really focused in on trying to get their arms around how do we make sure that we do a great job of coaching live opportunities after we were going to we're doing a medic and a command of the message engagement with this organization. So how do we get our opportunity coaching really, really solid? And somebody said, well, one of the things we're going to measure is how many opportunity coaching sessions a manager does in a given time frame. Either, how many do they do on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? And clearly a good metric, it's a starting point, it's a number, it tells you something. But by the time we got done with a 10-minute conversation, we had a few other metrics in place, like how many different deals are getting coached and how often are they getting coached? Because one and done coaching doesn't do it, right? What's happening to the movement in the buying cycle of those deals so that we can start to see how coaching is impacting either individual or team level or even collective level behaviors and deal velocity. And then as another example, we said, well, what about people past the coach? What about our second and third line leaders, even our CRO? And so one of the things we talked about was how do we measure the participation of the coach's coach, right? My boss, and how that person is showing up to either participate or maybe more importantly, coach me on the other side. So there's all the, you got to take those measurements and then start to pull on those threads. So you got these different data points that you can use to start to correlate, right? And I think the thing to think about here is if I've got the right metrics in place or the process measures that tell me I can keep an eye on the right things, I now know before I get out of the city of New York that I'm on the right direction. I'm not waiting until I get to Charlotte or Omaha to figure it out. And it's a lot easier to course correct if I'm thinking of it that way. So that's how I think about metrics, number one.
Yeah, it's really important for those leading indicators. So let's go into our next question is really, once you've established that, how is our training continuum ensuring application so we can drive the needed company outcomes?
Of the three questions, I think this is the most important one. I think this is the one that matters more than anything else. As I was thinking about this the other day, I was reminded of something I thought of a couple of years ago. Once in a while, I'll mention it. We've all of us have been to training. We've either delivered it or we've been in the delivery mode or whatever. And sometimes I feel like the training I've gone through is akin to standing on the side of the pool while we all watch Michael Phelps do a 100-meter butterfly, and then somebody comes behind us and they push us in the water, and as they push us in, they say, "Now you do it." And like that's because a lot of our training has a tendency to be focused on the thing versus the application. And so here's like 2 or 3 questions inside of this question that I think we've got to be asking ourselves. As I deliver and create something and think about aligning the training to the business objectives, the first question is, what do we want people doing differently? And how long should it take someone to develop that skill set? The second is, how will we pull this skill set into the training? Not just after the fact, but into the moment. Like, when we do medic, for example, we require that people bring live opportunities into the room.
Right.
Why? Because every step of the way, we are applying what's on the screen to live customer conversations and live deals so that people leave having used what we're doing in the moment. And I think the third question you've got to ask, and this is going to start to bleed into our next question, but what is your leadership team en masse willing to do to affect that change? Because if you don't have alignment on that, you got a big, big problem. And I think that ensures that what I'm doing and what I'm creating has a better chance of getting sponsorship, not just before or during, but more importantly, after we deliver it. So I'll just leave it at that for now, but I'll just finish it with this. You've got to have a leadership team that understands that they are on the hook to lead from the front through their behaviors and not just scream at the scoreboard. Hey, you got to go do what the training team just taught you. That's not how this works, right?
Right. I love that point about what do we want people to be doing differently.
Yeah.
And it has to show up in that customer engagement process, in those handshakes we talked about earlier, those that are, those leading indicators that are tied to the company outcomes, which brings us to the next question. And I also think, Brian, before I read this, if you consider what you want people to do differently, that's also a great way to get leadership buy-in, because they really don't care about the courses and the curriculum. They want the outcomes, right?
Yeah, they want the outcomes. So you've got to have conversations on the front end. And I think this question also starts to speak to it. You have to have the right conversations on the front end to help you get a seat at the table and continue to get a seat at the table. And so I think when we are developing these programs for our people, there's this concept, and I know there's some things coming this way, but there's this concept of who am I from a training and L&D and enablement team, who am I attaching to inside of the company? And how do I ensure that I'm getting all of these multiple points of view? Now, to this question specifically, I do think that back to that engagement process example that we showed before, it is the rare case where you should be doing something for just one of those roles. Because if I am in that, if I think about this go-to-market example, if I am in that value chain, if I'm one of those individual contributors that are coming in and out of the customer conversation in different places and times, it means I am bookended by at least one or two other people. So at a minimum, what we're identifying as critical skill sets for these different roles, there's still got to be at least at a minimum awareness, if not some level of understanding and or mastery of other roles inside of this. So maybe that's a way to think about this. You've got to make sure that whatever I'm asking someone to develop from a skill set, I'm at least thinking through and I'm acting on, well, how does that impact the people on the left and the right of that person inside the customer engagement?
Right. What am I attaching to for the company priorities, but how am I attaching to that customer engagement process, those handshakes for the buyer and for us, everyone along that continuum. And when it comes to sales enablement, we're really enabling that revenue mindset, this customer engagement process. A great go-to-market motion has that alignment in place, and a great sales enablement team really understands that.
Yeah, and I think they also understand this, that
Right.
great selling is not methodology. As I said recently, and I don't know why it took me this long in my career to get here, but I said to somebody recently, because they said, well, we're gonna use this methodology. And when they said it, it kind of hit me in the moment. I said, wait a minute, we're not making auto parts here or paint on an assembly line. I don't think the word methodology is what really matters for us. Well, because methodology means things don't change. And everyone here knows that every conversation we have is different. Every client we have is different. Every organization we have is different. And while the titles might be the same from one company to another, the people sitting in those seats are very different. So obviously, the science is critical. The science is the data that I need to be more effective and where that data comes from and all of the knowledge I need to have about our products and our marketplace and all of that. But then I've also got to enable the art. And if you can't enable both, or if you've got people who can't get both, you're going to struggle with this, because great selling and great customer conversations is the ability to effectively use the data that's being brought to me and given to me, whether it's content around our products and services or our point of view and the business problems we solve, et cetera. But I've also got to ensure that I'm enabling and I'm developing people's ability to do that in an artful manner. So, it goes back to something that someone you and I both know really well will say all the time, that people buy on emotion, that's the art, but they justify on logic, and that's the science. And so enabling people to solve the problem with those two sets of skills is really, really critically important. And I think maybe the punchline for me on this image is any enablement that I do, any training that I deliver to my team really should constantly have some sort of appropriate mix of both of these in the moment. It may not always be 50-50, but it's got to have the right mix of both.
Right. And that sets it up for success.
Yeah.
We've talked about great initiatives, training initiatives, and alignment. And the remaining question here is, how are we doing all this while aligning it to the tech stack and AI? How do we think about that? These training initiatives really have to incorporate those tools in a way that aligns to those same corporate outcomes, right? The outcomes we want to drive doesn't change, and we need to make sure that training is aligned to execution, and that execution is going to be involving AI more and more. And I know you've got some thoughts here, Brian. I'm just going to throw up this framework for those of you watching, because this is a framework we use with our customers to help think through sales training, AI. It's a proficiency and productivity framework, right? So knowledge being what you sell and the tools that inform that. Competencies being how you sell and the tools that help you do that, right? Coaching frameworks, training AI tools, AI-powered sales coaching. And this is how to kind of think about that tech stack, that AI, and where it comes into play in the execution part of the go-to-market motion, and what you can, a framework to help you think about the training with these tools. Thinking about AI, obviously we need to do it. It's a challenge that many of you have. And I know you're working with enablement folks right now, Brian, helping them think through this, and helping them align it to what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I know we have another image coming with the rep in the middle, so I'm gonna hold my thoughts on that for a second.
Okay.
I think the thing I want to throw at the group here is this idea that someone said to me recently that AI is a bigger wave than every, how did they say it? They didn't say IT, but it's the word that's stuck in my head. AI is a bigger wave than every piece of IT technology that's come at us in their own waves in the last 50 years combined. And that was a really interesting way to think about it. And I said, you know, I'm not the expert, so I'll buy it. Let's assume that they're right. They probably are, by the way, right? But I think that means that we have to be careful in the roles that we are in, because everyone on this call, me included, we are talking to leadership of the companies we either work for or work with, and they're, I guarantee everyone on this call is hearing this. You got to get AI into everything. We got to get AI into everything, and that can become overwhelming. And I'm just going to go back to this revenue mindset. I think if as L&D enablement training leaders, we have got to take the responsibility to look people in the eye and say, when they say AI and everything, my response is, to what end? To what end? What are you really trying to do here? Because if you're just trying to do AI for AI's sake, I got you covered, right? I'll just go out and buy the next 3 tools that I get BDR emails on, right? But if we can attach if I can attach what I do for a living to what we are truly trying to achieve as an organization over the next 3 quarters or 12 quarters or whatever the right timeline is for us in this moment in time, I got a much better shot of making the right AI investments and coming to you. You know, I was talking to a CFO back in December, and I always ask CFOs this question about, hey, when people come and ask you to spend money, how do you think about it? And I think a lot of us right now are going to be in this position. We're going to be asking our CFOs to spend money on AI. And I just telling you right now, they always say something similar, but this is the best thing I've ever heard from a CFO. He said to me, when a proposal to spend money on something like this comes across my desk, I immediately in my brain put it into one of 2 piles. It either goes into the Netflix pile or it goes into the electrical bill pile. It goes into the nice to have or the must have. And no matter what somebody's telling you, like a CRO or somebody else, we need AI. By the time your proposal to spend $25,000 or $250,000 on an AI tool gets to the CFO, I guarantee you that's what they're thinking. That's how they're looking at it. So why not attach to that from the start? And I'll go to the rep side here in a second.
Yeah, and you know, the dichotomy here is we talk about how AI is going to make us be more efficient and streamlined, but it can be really overwhelming because, you know, this is sort of a diagram we have to show like what it looks like for that rep, that person who's selling your solution in front of the customer. if it's, the revenue-based AI team here, we've got an agentic team, a different tech that's going to help them execute. And you need a foundation to enable the training on this. All of these tech tools, right, need a foundation to execute on. And so when you're thinking about how all of these come together, you need a model to kind of bring it all together to train on.
Well, and on top of that, there's probably 8 or 9 other people who aren't on this slide, right? That are all coming to the rep, or the rep is going to, right? But you know my point of view on this. My point of view on this whole world right now for sellers is, I think you could rip most pieces of technology out of your sellers or your sales go-to-market team's hands, and they would throw a parade for you because they're forced to use them, but nobody else uses them. And the perfect example of that is showing up at an opportunity review or a deal coaching session, whatever you call it, only to find out that nobody looked at Salesforce ahead of time. So all the information you've put in on the deal over the last 2 months, you spend 28 of the 30 minutes walking everybody through so your boss can say, hey, good job. Let me know if you need some help. I got to go. Right. So if you're going to do this, my ask on behalf of every go-to-market person in the world, every individual contributor, is you've got to make sure that whatever technology you invest in, it has a high chance of being the piece of technology that your people will quit over if you take it away from them, because it creates that much value. And that's why I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe I'll say it now, I do think that as big and as difficult as this conversation is right now, I do think some of these AI tools that I've already started to see from people that we know and have been coming to us could start to help answer that age-old question. If I buy this technology, is it really going to create value? But that's the mindset we've got to have as well as we think about it and look at it. And I know we want to talk a little bit about leadership, so maybe we can dive there quick.
Right. And if you do AI right, it enables the company objectives and boost your training organizations. And it can I want to talk about managers, right? It can help your managers reinforce your initiatives, right? Because they're a forcing function of the success of the initiative, and often are an afterthought, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, they're often an afterthought because sometimes they're the ones trying to use their title as a bush to hide behind. Just go train the individual contributors, right? But the problem with that is, and there's more than enough empirical data out there to prove this, but the problem with that is that's focusing on the wrong audience. If you do something to change behavior or develop skill and you don't enable the leadership team to have that skill set and then coach that skill set, you shouldn't bother to do it. You're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. That's my take on this, in that if you have the right leaders with the right skills, the right individual contributors will follow. And I don't just mean first line leaders. I mean all leaders. If you think about leaders as like a coaching staff on any sports team, think of it this way. Your first line leaders are your position coaches. I coach one specific position on this team, or maybe two, right? And those are different skills, right? This player over here, the wide receiver on the football team, has a very different set of skills than the quarterback, than the offensive lineman, than the defensive linebacker, right? My second line leaders are coordinators. They coordinate one part of the team. They coordinate the entire offense. They coordinate the entire defense, whatever. And then my third line leaders and up, those are head coaches. And the reason those all matter is because while the first line leader is coaching individual skill, the second line and up, their job is to coach the first line coaches on how to coach better. So if we're going to do something and we think about our training initiatives, we got to think about how are we going to ensure that our leadership is lined up here on this? Because if they're not going to lead from the front through behaviors, you shouldn't spend the time and money on training people, because it's just like a throw it up and cross your fingers kind of initiative.
Right. And if you do it right, you can see the positive change in your
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, Brian, I know we want to get to questions. We've got some coming in, but I just want to wrap it up with sort of some key takeaways, kind of your final thoughts, your bottom lines here.
I have 3 things. And I wrote these, so I'm going to read them. You have to have a leadership team that is honest about where the business is now and what the appropriate short and long-term business objectives are. Because without that, your training is just a guess. And it might be good and it might be enjoyable, but it's not going to create the chances of it creating outcomes for the business are a bit of a prayer, right? I think maybe even more importantly than that, you have to have a relationship with company leadership. And I know that's not easy, but what do we say to salespeople all the time? How do you eventually get more access to economic buyers? You do that by consistently going back to the business problem and the business outcomes. So why wouldn't we do the same things internally? So in my point of view, you've got to be developing relationships with sales leadership, surprise, surprise, right? Product, marketing, and finance. And you do that by consistently talking about what are the business problems we're trying to solve, what are the business objectives we're trying to solve for. And that's what helps you create a better understanding and attachment to what those people care about. And I've seen the credibility of people in roles like ours really skyrocket when they can do that and do it consistently. And then last, change is hard. We know that, but I heard something about 3, 4 months ago. I wish I could give him credit, but I didn't write down his name. But he said something really important. He said, change is often seen as violence against the status quo, and those who do not want change often see it as violence against themselves. And
Ooh.
right? I mean, it just stuck with me. And I thought about some of the ugliest deals I ever worked on as a rep or a sales leader. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And I think that applies here as well. You've got to understand the who's who in your organization and align yourself to the people who want change and are going to lead it. And even some of those who want change, but they need somebody else to lead it. But stop wasting your time with the people who are trying to stop change, because they're not going to be here long, or you won't be here long. Let's be honest, right? So those are my big three.
Right. Those are some great takeaways. Multi-thread your attachment to the
Yes.
outcomes and the
Well
people
said. I love the way you said that. Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to toss it back to Emma. I think we have some questions coming in, and let's hear what the questions are, Emma. Thank you for all of you for watching the presentation.
Thank you. All right, let's see here. All right, first question. Our company needs a consistent enterprise selling process, but we are starting from scratch. Where should we start?
Wow. That's a great question. How long is a piece of string? Somebody in England said that to me one time when I asked a big question like this. It's a great question. I think there's a couple ways to think about it. The first thing I would suggest is you've got that little image we had of that engagement process. If I was a new CRO today and I was about to undertake what I think you're saying here, we got a lot to do and we just really don't have any real baseline. I would start there. I would start with the customer journey and how are we aligned to that in terms of everything from lead gen to cross sell, upsell, and renewal. And every role that is either customer facing or customer supporting, who is going to enter and exit that customer engagement lifecycle, and identifying who are all those people, where do they enter, exit, and what are the critical moments in time where those people have got to connect with each other to be more fluent and more effective in front of the customer. Because I think if you identify that kind of looking from the ceiling down view of the whole customer journey, you're in a better position to think about, okay, now what do we go attack first? Because that's a big elephant. So that's where I would start. You start there, because if you do that, then you can start to identify, so what are the critical skills and where we weaken those critical skills? Because then it denotes, oh, all right, then let's go do, like, one of the big things we do is um, um, opportunity qualification and opportunity coaching. Maybe that's the place to start. Maybe it's over here in terms of how we think about cross sell, upsell, and renewals, because our business is already pretty heavy customer oriented and it's about growing our current customer base. So I think that's how you think about it. Great question. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's great advice, figuring out where to start, breaking it down like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. This is great, but what if I don't have a leadership team who thinks this way or would support such an initiative?
This is great, but I think it's another great question. Most of us have been there in some form or fashion. We've worked for someone, either in this role or in another life, that is not aligned or doesn't think this way. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest. You have to make a decision. And I think that the first decision you have to make is, are there other people in the organization that I can align to that have power and influence who can start to help me turn the tide with this person or build a wall around them or whatever? Because if you cannot create I mean, think of this like a sales cycle. What do we tell a sales rep who cannot create a coalition of the willing in one of their accounts? You might have to qualify the deal out. I'm not saying you should quit your job tomorrow without another job. I want to be very clear. And Rachel, I think you got something to add here. But I do think you have to be honest about what you're dealing with and whether or not you can build a coalition with other players in the room. Rachel, what are you thinking?
Yeah, you make you distinguish between skeptics and cynics a lot of times, Brian, and I think that framework might be helpful here. Like when you're trying to launch change or new programs, to think about the skeptics versus the cynics. That might be helpful for you to kind of walk through the difference there.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Rachel? Because the electrical storm is kicking in and I
Oh,
lost you for a sec.
great. No, you know how we've talked about too, when we talk a lot about this, like dealing with people who don't want to change, right? And how do you, especially if they're above you and you're trying to manage up, and that concepts you talk about of skeptics versus cynics, I think
Oh,
is
thanks.
helpful here and might be
Yeah.
helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I love this. This idea that typically at time of change, there's three types of people in the room: early adopters, skeptics, and cynics. Find your early adopters, attach to them, find ways to promote them and get their point of view out on the table. Because if you do that, now you're left with your skeptics and your cynics. And skeptics and cynics have a tendency to look a lot alike, right? They kind of sit there with their arms crossed. That's a good example of the body language you might see. But here's the difference: skeptics are willing to be converted. The problem is skeptics have seen this movie before. So if you act and act accordingly, you'll start to convert your skeptics. And the beauty of that is that means your cynics now they've self-identified, because cynics will never change. So if you act, and if you act in some of the ways we're talking about, attached to the business level objectives, like what CFO with their salt would not want to know that the training organization is focused on everything they do attaching to the financial objectives of the company. So that will start to identify who your skeptics are, and they will convert. Skeptics will always convert when they see action. If they don't convert, it means they're cynics. Don't waste your time with cynics. As I used to say, if you're a cynic on my team, we're going to make you available to industry at large. Now, I know that we can't fire people, but you get my point. I'm not going to waste my time with them.
And nurturing those people is a great step to get your initiative aligned to those
Oh,
objectives,
yeah,
right? The more people you can get on board, the easier your job is.
yeah. Nurture your skeptics, because the other piece of data that's out there is that skeptics are often the best people to connect yourself to, because when they convert, others will convert, because organizations know who the skeptics are and they say to themselves, well, if that person's converting, I'm converting, because that person won't convert unless they believe it. Attached to skeptics.
Yeah, there you go. All right. I thought that would be helpful. I wanted you to go
Thanks,
through that.
Rachel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fabulous. Thanks for that. Okay, we have time for one more question. What advice do you have for making any sales or manager training stick for the long term? The excitement and momentum fades a few weeks after our training.
What a great last question. Don't do the training unless you can. Here's my advice: do not do the training unless you can stand in that moment of training and say, here's what is planned for the next 90, 120, 180 days, very specifically, to get this into our DNA. And by the way, if it's not worth getting into the DNA, don't do the training. Oh, by the way, whatever you're going to do to plan to get things into the DNA, you've got to have the right level of support so that when you say it, or someone else like the CRO says it, people know that it's real. That is my number one piece of advice. Do not do the event if that's all it's going to be remembered as. As I like to say whenever I'm in front of a group, we need to think about today as nothing more than the end of the beginning. That means we've planned out the next 6 months to really create culture change, DNA change, operating rhythm change. That's how I think about it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Brian and Rachel. This has been a great session.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Brian. Thank you to all of you for watching.
Bye.
Awesome. Well, we have a 15-minute break, but up next we have Nolan Hott and Dan Rust from InfoPro Learning for their session, How to Enable Sales Excellence Amid Uncertainty. In just a moment, I'm going to end this session. You can join our next session by going back to the event lobby and going to the Sessions tab. I hope you all stick around, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, everyone.